Welcome to OLR Connections, the podcast of the Ohio Lodge of Research. In this episode, we discuss with three brothers from Kentucky and members of the Ohio Lodge of Research the benefits of Freemasonry and the challenges that it faces, and some of the roles that lodges of research may play in solving some of those problems. Well, several of you, or all three of you, mentioned that you're members of multiple lodges of research. But I think, like a lot of lodges of research, Ohio as well, we're kind of trying to figure out where we fit in modern Masonry, trying to figure out what role we can fill and what advantages we can offer. One of the questions that we at the Ohio Lodge of Research have been trying to answer for at least the last 2 or 3 years is what is Masonic research?
For me, Masonic research can go a lot of different ways. If you're wanting a broad statement, it's anything Masonic related. To me, what is Masonic research is better wrote down and assigned to individuals. Because for you, well, we'll say for somebody in a grand line position that has to work with the nuts and bolts and the business aspect of what is Masonic research, it would, of course, first and foremost, probably be furthering Masonry as far as the numbers, retention, things like that. The analytical, if you will, of Masonry. Somebody more interested in the history, such as like this year, we added a new Grand Line officer at our last grand session, and that's Grand Historian. Of course, for him, Masonic research is the history. So to answer that in one way is almost impossible. It really has to be answered as from whose viewpoint it is, a point of view kind of deal of what is Masonic research.
One of the things I think in Ohio Lodge of Research that we've noticed is that there are a lot of brothers who are afraid or scared of what it means to do research.
So for me, I'm one of those individuals. I don't write papers. I didn't write them in school. I knew what I was doing. I knew what I was talking about, any subject you want to talk about. As far as just talking about it, except for math, I could pretty well hold my own in. But I didn't write papers. It's just not something I enjoy doing. I don't care for it. I like to read. I'll read a paper all day long. I can relay the information in that paper to you just fine. I can educate you on a subject without writing the paper. And understand the need for the papers, because to write it down is how we've always learned as a species. Knowledge is passed through writing stuff down. I fully understand the need and want for writing a paper, but I don't write papers. It's just not in me. For me, the lodges of research are a personal growth tool. It's so I can learn and then hopefully pass that knowledge along through word of mouth. So something I've always said, when asked, you always get asked, especially by new members, people looking, going, what is the secret? And something that I've always kind of said is, I can't tell you that, because for you, it's different than it is for me. We all have our own Masonic secret, if you will. What we found when we went looking. Not that I'm afraid of getting up and speaking in front of people. We all know that ain't the case. It's just a matter of I just don't write paper. It's not something I'm interested in doing.
Nick, Jason, your thoughts?
I think, as far as one of the lodges research that I'm a member of here, Ted Adams, most of the brothers there seem to have no problem with writing papers. I mean, we've got out of that lodge, probably 3 or 4 of our premier, Masonic education presenters in the state. And they do a very good job of saying, hey, let's talk about things we can write papers on and then present the education at the meetings. Now I have been to some other meetings in the state where it's presented more like, well, we need to do this. We need to do, we've got this district meeting and this district meeting we have to present at. Who wants to do it? And, the sound of crickets in the room is louder than the sounds of people breathing, I think, at that point. And there's no volunteers, and somebody gets assigned, and even they're like, I don't think so. So it just, again, it kind of depends on the region that the Lodge of Research is located in. Whether you have those brothers who jump up and say, oh, I'll research this topic, you do this topic, we'll come together, we'll put a presentation together and give it, that's fine. And, others, they just kind of, well, we could talk about this, or we could talk about that, there's no, you go through a whole meeting of, well, we might do this, we might do that, and by the time the meeting is over, nobody said a definite, well, I'll pick this topic. Nobody really wants to make the first move and do it. So it's kind of a regional issue, I guess you could say, as far as, do the lodges of research actually promote research, or are they just talking about what they'd like to research and it just never happens?
At some point last year, I know Dick, who's our sitting Grandmaster now, as Deputy Grandmaster, was visiting lodges of research and asking them to basically educate membership on how to do research. Of course, I didn't visit all the times he did, but at least a couple of times we happened to be at lodges of research at the same time, and he was asking the master and just the lodge in general sort of to teach membership how to do it, because a lot of guys are very much in the sort of the same boat you're talking about, that they may be interested in research, but they don't really know what research exactly looks like, or maybe they're a little concerned about how to go about doing it, or how to present it, or I don't know what standard formula to maybe use, or really even what a paper should look like or contain, I guess. I know one of them sort of didn't exactly offer classes, but of course there was sort of consensus, like, oh yeah, if anybody needs something, they know how, like, talk to so-and-so, whatever. One of them didn't really do anything, but it was also the same one I mentioned earlier that didn't really have, I don't know, the capacity to do things in the first place because it's barely meeting. William Aware, I know, requires a paper or membership even. Of course, you're welcome to hang out, come to any meeting you want to, but alongside your petition is the requirement for a paper or presentation or something, not necessarily, I guess, proving you know what you're doing, but proving probably your interest, I guess. And like the guys have said, basically, I think it depends very much on where the lodge is and the membership they're in.
Jimmie, you made the comment that, if the Lodge of Research for you is more about gaining the knowledge for yourself. So is that the function, should that be the function of a Lodge of Research, is to provide a resource base, if you will?
I think in part, yes. I mean, that's base of writing a paper. That's why you write the paper, so it can be laid into the archives, so to say. To a point, yes. Like, I think it's beneficial to have a library of sorts where you can go in, if you want to know about a subject, go into, a database, say, hey, so-and-so wrote this paper on this. Might be what I'm looking for, read the paper. I think that would be very beneficial for a lodge research, to actually sit down and organize what they're researching into a functioning library. So that other brothers can go and visit that. The sad thing about organization is, for probably 90% of the brothers, their Masonic knowledge comes from the monitor or the ritual. And they, I've even heard it presented when being presented your monitor. Here, once you're raised, we give you your, monitor. I've even heard it being presented as everything you need to know about Masonry is in this book. And the sad thing is, so here in Kentucky, we have 3 books that we can use. 4 technically. One's in code. Well, so we have the KYRTL and then the Kentucky Ritual. It's the same book. One of them's in code, one of them's not. And then we have the Trestle Board by H.B. Grant and the
Monitor by Pirtle.
Monitor by Pirtle. And the sad thing is, if a lodge was to use, at least I know the Trestle Board, if you hand it to a lodge of new masons, so this is everything you need to know about masonry, well, they're never going to get their meeting opened. And they're sure not going to close it. And they'll barely conduct any of the degrees in any sense of the matter. It's a small guidebook for masonry. And even with the monitors and the ritual, it is barely enough to open and close the lodge. It is by no means everything you need to know about masonry to be able to function as a mason, traveling as a master in different lodges. And so I think the sad thing is that that is the only thing ever that some brothers ever know. Even like we got to see it firsthand this year. Nick come in as master and they started with these new EAs that they had this year. They kind of restructured their education program into a 2-month program instead of our traditional 28 days. And they took Claudie's introductions to Freemasonry. We're lucky enough to have an educator here in our lodge, well, in their lodge. And he actually, stood up, stepped in, said, hey, I'll make slideshows, I'll do the education like I'm teaching my students. And he took Claudie's and made slideshows, gave presentations, and that was the classwork of it. They still studied their obligations, they still studied all the stuff that were required, but it was teaching them to be EAs and fellowcrafts.
When you said that, the monitor is all you need to know about what they teach is that the monitor is all you need to know about masonry. My other thought that passed through my mind was that it's the monitor and hearsay, right? What most masons learn about masonry is what the guy sitting beside them tells them.
Right.
And we all know, where that gets you. Does do lodges of research is there an opportunity for them to start dispelling some of the hearsay, the rumors, the misconceptions, the confusion that's out there?
If you're gonna get rid of a misconception or try to right a wrong in Kentucky, you better be fully prepared to go to bat for it. It can't be an opinion. It's got to be a fact, and you got to be able to show where it's fact.
Which is almost an argument that the lodges of research are the place to dispel those myths, right?
Right.
You get the people to actually do the research and gather the information and present it in such a way that it is beyond a shadow of a doubt.
Right.
So now that you've gathered for a year and started to incorporate into your lodge, anything you can share back with us, anything that you found that really works, that you think that not only, regardless of whether they're Kentucky or Ohio or whatever, but things that other lodges should start to incorporate?
I really think education should be, there's this whole conversation early in my tenure, I guess, about the word mandatory, because I called something like 8 committees, one of which was a committee on education, which to McKee was new, we didn't really have. But I really wanted to, frankly, require candidates as they were coming through to learn what the hell it was they were doing, because for so long it's been, okay, here's a catechism. Yeah, we may practice with you. Yeah, we may work on it. But as far as actually knowing what it is you're saying, what it is you're frankly swearing and committing yourself to do, a lot of guys couldn't tell you what half of it meant, let alone where it came from or what it referred to or any allusions in any case whatsoever.
What some of the words even were.
Right, like a lot of guys couldn't even pronounce them. I don't know. So to me, the takeaway is frankly requiring education. In part, yes, that even means at meetings, and that's certainly what we've done this year. Every single meeting, we've had either a guest presentation or a presentation from one of my officers. But then also requiring education as guys to go through sort of the candidate, or the steps as a candidate, right? Like, we've started with Claudia's introductions, but I think that's a very, very rudimentary beginning. And I'm very, very grateful for the guy that did a lot of the legwork for us, but I really hope in the years to come that it evolves greatly. Just because there's so much material. A lot of my guys are concerned about, oh God, you're gonna make these guys wait years to become a fellow craft or years to become a master mason. I'm like, it's not really the point at all. But in my mind, if you can become a master mason in 3 months, what is it you've really gained? What is it you actually learned? And for a lot of the guys, of course, that sort of speed through the process, you can ask them what any of the things it is that they've learned mean, and they couldn't tell you any of it. They might be able to regurgitate a catechism. They don't know what it is. They don't really know what they've sworn to do. They know you can't sleep with your wife now, but you know, what is it that you're actually supposed to be doing, not only for your lodge, for your brothers, but even yourself?
So what would you like to see from the Ohio Lodge of Research in particular that would draw you back up this way again? What kind of events would you like to see, or do you think would benefit the brothers?
I mean, me personally, I really enjoyed the way the last meeting run. Towards the end of it, I started kind of getting a little restless and had to go wandering around a little bit. But I like how you all do your lodge discussions. You know, it's kind of the time to talk, really, you know, explore ideals, and then you present your paperwork within the lodge, you know, as kind of a more laser focused
Mhm.
area. I really did appreciate that.
I would actually push back on your comment earlier about how you don't write papers. I think you need to write papers. You're the one that made the comment that the purpose of writing papers is so that what you have learned is laid into the archives of the lodge.
Right.
You've learned a lot. Now, here's what the thing I personally kind of trying to figure out how to proceed is that there are people who can write very quickly, very easily, write very formal papers. But there are other guys who, you know, have a much more informal writing style, and they're still sharing just as good of a quality of information. And so for you, I would challenge you to get one of the um, um, voice to text recorders. And I think like PowerPoint does it for that matter now. And literally, when you give a presentation, just hit that button and record, and you'll end up with a first draft of your paper without ever touching a keyboard. And then you actually have a way of sharing those thoughts, because the challenge with, and you know this, I'm preaching to the choir here to some extent, the challenge of only giving presentations is the knowledge you have gathered only gets shared with the people in the room. Whereas when it's written, you don't know who that's going to touch. You know, it may be, you know, 100 years from now, someone may find that. And so I would, that's my challenge to you, is to actually start putting something on paper. But, and, you know, I see Jason nodding. He's going to hold you accountable.
I've been thinking about starting one.
Yeah.
Like, I have a question that there is no good answer for. And once again, here in Kentucky, if you're gonna do it, it's gonna be you doing it. If you want it done, you're gonna do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And so I have been kind of kicking the ideal around about starting one. It's just, I'm very much on being who you are in life. I didn't do great in school.
Yeah.
Mostly because I hated writing papers. I hated
Yeah.
classwork. History, I mean, just a couple days ago, I pointed out one of my history teachers that failed me in US history. Not because I didn't know I was getting A's and B's on his test, but because I wouldn't take notes.
And I think that's the advantage of being an adult in education, is we can do it our own way now. So,
Right.
yeah. Yeah.
I understand his hands was probably tied to some extent, but it just wasn't how I had to do it.
Oh, I get that.
I was raised, so me and Nick kind of had this joke between us that I was kid across the tracks, so to say. Nick was raised, his mother was a librarian, did very well in school, went to college. I started building tractors and semi trucks at 13 and 14-year-old. I built my first engine at 11, built my first tractor at 14. If you want to know about mechanics, sure, I can explain it to you. Writing the paper is a different story for me all the way around.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
It's a whole new experience, really, because it ain't been done since high school.
Right.
And even then, if I can pay somebody to do it, that's what I done.
But that's my point, is that, you know, if you use these tools that are out there now, you don't have to write a paper.
Right.
You can just stand there and talk. And do you know Dan Horinko? That's how he writes his books. Is he actually puts a headset on and talks, and it voice to text. That's how he writes all of his books.
Hmm.
Now, I'm sure he has an editing process after that as well, or maybe he hands it off to an editor. But no, he's told me personally that's how he writes his books, is that he collects all of his information and his research, and like you, a lot of it's just in his mind, and he'll have like note cards that'll literally have like 1 or 2 words on it. And it's just all it is a refresher of this is what I want to talk about. And so when he's ready to write his book, he holds up in a cabin somewhere, and for like 3 days, he flips through these cards and just talks about what he has learned. That's pretty much how he writes his books. So you're not alone.